Before the kingdom we call Earth existed, we existed upon another most glorious planet. Upon it waved fields of flowers and blooming orchards that were far more beautiful than those that are upon our Earth now. Delightful fragrances filled all the air, and crystal clear lakes locked the cascading spangled springs. Warm fogs and puffy clouds sensually massaged the landscape, and like paints on canvas, amused the eyes. All the animals upon this planet were tame and friendly. In fact, all beings, both animals and people, could discern one another's thoughts. They lived in harmony, having one heart and one mind, and having no poor or hardship among them. They lived in the ease and comfort, peace and plenty. The king and queen of this most glorious planet was also infallibly just and true. They walked upright like human beings, but stood 9 feet tall, like giants. Their long hair, curled and waved up over their back, streamed into their heads, where golden crowns were prominently displayed. And upon their bodies they wore white, gleaming robes that were as bright as the snow on a sunny day. Also, their big owl-like eyes could peer right into your soul. And there was no particle in the universe that was out of place that did not go unnoticed. Their arms and their hands could change into whatever shape they wished. Sometimes they made them into a paintbrush, sometimes a hammer, other times a musical instrument. And their feet could skate them across the surface of the land as quick as thought itself. All beings and creatures in this beautiful kingdom listened when they spoke, for out of their mouths there came flaming swords. Their very voice could divide the light from the darkness. It could divide spirit from matter, and air from stone, and fire from ice. There was no force in the universe that could prevail against them. Under the protection of this king and queen, there was no hate, no violence, and no death that could breach the walls of their kingdom. And as a result, their citizens, which were their children, were immune from sickness and guarded from any injury. They did not know what despair was or sorrow. They had never experienced the extreme conditions of fire or ice. They were innocent of the lonely cold of the north or the burning suffering of the south. Instead, everyone lived in the comforts and beauty of their surroundings, and they imitated perfectly the wisdom of their parents. Because of their parents' abiding love for them, they were free of any fear about being abandoned to the void of darkness just beyond their walls. One day, their parents were observing their work, Some of their children were singing, some were dancing, some were painting, and others were building magnificent buildings. Whatever they did with perfection. They followed the instructions and forms that their parents had given them with exact precision. And their parents were very pleased with their children's achievements. Yet at the same time, there was something lacking. Something left them unfulfilled. For all the gifts that were bestowed upon their children, they could not be fully appreciated because they were merely imitated. And the sea of truth they bathed in every day was not absorbed in wisdom, but rather just recited. And their recitations were no more pondered over than the partially digested owl pellet that is regurgitated. It seemed that their thoughts and their deeds and their words were trite and artificial, like a toy. And so the one scar of imperfection in this world was ironically its perfection. Everything operated like clockwork at the beck and call of the king and queen. Knowledge was absorbed freely, without effort, and all the beauty that their children created were not personal expressions of creativity. The children was incapable of wisdom, incapable of any kind of artistic expression. Any more than they were capable of lying or deceiving one another. For they all lived with one heart and one mind. So their parents wished that their children would act out of personal conviction, that they would speak with integrity and power. But in a world of perfect bliss, it was impossible for them to develop such characteristics. And so, after 7,000 years, the Queen declared, "It is time that we build a second world, whereupon our children can look after it and govern it by themselves." And the king said, "Yes, I agree. It's time that our children's beliefs are tested and challenged." And so with their shape-shifting hands and arms, and with their flaming words, they began the work of creation. And the great king spoke, "Let there be a sphere of light and beauty be formed." And behold, immediately, fire separated from ice. And in the middle was a new sea of gleaming glass. This was a young sphere of light. It had not yet hardened like their parents' kingdom. But its watery substance and matter was still refined and pure, where no mortal eyes could even perceive it. And the queen breathed into the world the breath of life. And immediately out of the axis of this spiritual world grew a massive fruit tree. Its roots stretched deep into the dark depths, and its limbs climbed to the sunny heights. The queen named these depths hell, and the sunny heights heaven. Then the king said, "Let the waters be divided." And immediately, hot, flaming land masses began to emerge up through the oceans. Steam, clouds rose up into the air, encircling all the planet. It began to rain and pour down on the mountaintops. The mountaintops were as a crying face. Those streaming tears collected down into the low places as massive rivers, large lakes, and seas. Then the queen said, "Let the land be divided and prepared for all its inhabitants." She divided the land masses so that some were assigned different climates. Some lands were assigned to be very cold and icy, and others were assigned to be dry and arid. And in the middle there was the warm tropical climates. Other land masses were lifted up as great barren mountaintops that looked like the earth's backbone. And other areas were laid low, level as grassy plains. And in the middle there were shrubby woodlands and forests. When all the world was created, the queen and the king gathered everyone together in a great family gathering. And the king said, "We have finished a new heaven and a new earth, where all may dwell, live upon in joy. Each of you will inhabit different lands, tend after them, care for them, and each of the lands will bless you in different ways. If you are faithful over a few things, then one day I will make you Lord and Master over many things." Then the queen spoke. She said, "We will not be present here with you, but you will be able to tune into our creation songs and our songs of peace. Listen to the vibrations and rhythms of the mountaintops. You always walk straight and true. And if you partake of the great tree of life, it will renew your bodies and remind you of our wisdom." But when all the creatures heard this, the trees clapped their hands, the animals danced, and all the people sang out with the majestic mountains with joy. In the blue heavenly heights of this new heaven, the king and queen assigned 12 of their sons and 12 of their daughters the job of looking over all the earth. These were 12 gods and goddesses. They were among the most intelligent and noble of all of the king and queen's children. And upon the barren mountaintops, another group of people lived. They developed large bodies, like the giant stature of their parents. And the people that inherited the forests also grew long hair and big eyes that perceived and discerned one another's feelings, like their parents. And the people that inhabited the the earth, or inhabited the world under it, in the underworld, they were stunted like dwarves. They dug deep into the earth for the hidden treasures of knowledge. And above the world, in the air, flew and flitted about the flying fairies. All of these developed the ability to perceive the future. Each of the geographic areas that the people inhabited developed different talents, different gifts, all to serve and bless one another. Well, among the 12 gods and goddesses that inhabited heaven, there were two brothers, Michael and Lucifer, who were some of the most beloved and intelligent. Michael, he was a valiant warrior, full of strength and courage. Lucifer, on the other hand, was known for his luminous, witty cleverness. Michael's strength was stronger than the combined strength of many giants. And Lucifer, why, he was the most cunning and brilliant of all the gods. But Lucifer was not very fond of his brother Michael. He was envious of his proud performances of strength. And he wished that his inconspicuous talents were more popular among his brothers and sisters. He also questioned, being intelligent, his father's plan. And one day he asked the very question, what will happen to those of us who lose touch with our parents' music and forget their songs of peace? Michael discerned his doubting. He said, Lucifer, why do you question our father's plan? Do you not know that he is the wisest of us all? And why do you, he asked Michael, accept his words so blindly? Do you not see the risk in his plan? Do you not understand? There will be no guarantees. We will listen to his vibrations on the Rocky Mountains. It is more likely that our thoughts will actually guide our choices toward dark paths of entrapment. Well, Michael said wisely, if you can't trust in yourself, how will you be able to be free and have a fullness of joy? Oh, I do trust myself, Lucifer said. Only I feel like my plan is far more superior than our father's. If I am made king over this new heaven and earth, why, I will ensure that no one steps off the path of safety and peace. When Lucifer's parents, with their all-seeing eyes, realized how brazenly committed Lucifer was to the destruction of all his brothers and sisters' freedom, how his heart was filled with envy and pride, they came to him to warn him. They said, Lucifer, our beloved and most brightest, your mind and your heart doorways are beginning to close off. All of our songs of peace and our thoughts of joy. You already know the consequences of carrying on with this will lead to the fate of death and hell. Then Lucifer twisted and gnarled up his face in anger, and he yelled back, "If you send me to hell, then I will seize control of this heaven and earth by force." And indeed, from that time forth, Lucifer began to plot against his father and mother's will. He cleverly undermined their authority by murmuring and questioning their reliability. He convinced over a third of his brothers and sisters that their parents did not love them. How could they, he reasoned, if he were willing to abandon even some of us to hell? And very soon, these brothers and sisters' hearts and minds began to close off their parents' thoughts and feelings as well. And they no longer could hear his wisdom or remember his songs of creation. As Lucifer's infectious ideas spread more and more, this only emboldened him and made him even more confident that he indeed could seize control of heaven. And he taught all his followers how to lie and deceive to get gain. He himself began to transform and express his outer appearance by the mere use of his imagination. And one day, he made himself into a terrible red dragon that had 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon those heads. And his skin became hardened with thick scales. His arms grew out with wings, and his nostrils began to breathe out flames of fire. His fingernails became razor-sharp knives, and his mouth sported jagged and saw-like teeth. The red, terrible dragon flew over the land and the seas, declaring that he was the new ruler of heaven and earth, and he was the most powerful. None could prevail against him. Well, very quickly, the spiritual world degenerated into divisive rivalries and factions. Lucifer pitted the grubby dwarfs and the gruffy giants against the fairies that flew and the forest people, just for his amusement. And the great king and queen, with their all-seeing eyes, watched everything in grief and sorrow. The queen lamented, "Oh, it breaks my heart to see my children fighting among themselves. How soon have they forgot our ways of peace and love?" Well, the divisions and divisiveness did not stop. They only intensified, making it nearly impossible for them to live together. And soon there were rumors that there would be a great and final war. Instead of the spirit world being a peaceful and harmonious place, like their parents' home, why it became a place of feuding factions and fuming hatred. Their hearts and their minds were far removed from their heavenly parents, and ever more influenced by those thoughts of Lucifer. And even the animals became wild. The animals, rather than being playful and friendly, ran away in fear. And it was at this time that the seven-headed dragon and all his comrades invaded heaven. They encircled all of the golden city. And they took their spiked tails and began to dash apart the pillars that held it up. All the buildings came tumbling into rubble. And the great seven-headed dragon sat upon the throne and awarded himself as king with his 7 crowns. Now, Michael had vowed that he would never allow Lucifer to gain control of this new heaven and earth. He also had formed a very formidable army out of all the different all the different people on the earth. He enlisted the help of the dwarfs and the fairies. He enlisted the help of the mountain giants and the forest and plain people. He armed them with spears and swords, and he dressed them in fireproof clothing, all with breastplate, shield, helmet, and boots. Then they rode upon white-winged horses. With Michael at their lead, they marched toward the city to regain the throne from the dragons. But as they approached the city, the intense flames of the dragons out of their nostrils became so heated that the horses reared up and were nearly going to run away. Michael galloped out in front of them with a great rallying cry. "Bury your fears," he said. "Bury your fears and face the flames. Remember your families and your freedom. Raise up your spears as a shot to the start. Throw them like shooting stars. Staunch be your front against furious sail. Strong be your soul where the feeble have failed." And when Michael had said these words, all the horses charged right into the engulfing flames of the dragons. The dragon Michael was consumed, it appeared, into the flames of the 7-headed dragon. The whole world began to reel to and fro, began to tremble and shake. Great fissures and cracks opened up, and from every crevice and cauldron it spewed forth fiery rocks, lava streams and rivers that devoured everything in their path. And in the great turmoil and chaos, Michael, protected by his shining armor, lifted his sword and lopped off one of the dragon's heads. As it fell, the terrible dragon began to writhe in pain. He screamed to his comrades to retreat, to the safety of hell. All of them. And then crawl down to the depths of the darkness under the earth, ranting, "Michael, you may have won this battle, but I will return. I will take what is rightfully mine. I will reclaim the throne." And then, with a malicious smile, he began to gnaw on the roots of the tree of life itself with his saw-like teeth. And that was the end of the spiritual world that we one time lived in. But thankfully, it was the beginning of its physical formation. For today, this is all I will say, but I hope you will return to hear the 7-part story of its physical formation.